Newly appointed U.S. Border Patrol Chief Mark Morgan testifies about Border Patrol checkpoints, strategy, national security, and resources that are needed by the agency.
Committee on Homeland Security, Subcommittee on Border and Maritime Security will come to order. The subcommittee is meeting today to examine the U.S. Border Patrol's Defense in-Depth strategy and its effect on local communities. I recognize myself now for an opening statement. First, I'd like to thank Chief Mark Morgan, who is testifying now before Congress for the first time as the new Chief of Border Patrol. Like your predecessors, I'm sure you will be spending frequent visits to our subcommittee as we discuss very important questions related to border security. Things like, what does a secure border look like? What are the right tools and strategies to achieve a secure border, and how do we measure success or failure? Today, I want to focus on the second question, an aspect of the current Border Patrol strategy known as Defense in Depth. Specifically, the unintended consequences this strategy imposes on border communities and residents that live along the border, including many of my constituents. In the early 1990s, the Border Patrol and U.S. Customs Service were outmatched in all aspects of illegal activity, both between and at the ports of entry. Yet, despite having a smaller Border Patrol at the time, agents apprehended millions of people. Border Patrol's response to this activity in El Paso and San Diego led to Operations Hold the Line and Gatekeeper that surged resources to the border in those major urban areas. In the short term, it stemmed the tide of illicit activity. However, it had the unintended effect of pushing the illicit activity away from urban areas and into the remote rural areas of the border. By design, the shifting cartel activity into more rugged terrain gave the Border Patrol the advantage of time to interdict people and target the contraband of smuggling. Border Patrol leadership routinely has articulated the strategy's effectiveness by explaining that in urban areas they had a mere seconds to minutes to intercept the illegal activity, in suburban areas minutes to hours, and in rural areas they had anywhere from hours to days to interdict the illegal activity. Ceding territory for time has had profound ramifications, however, for populated rural areas along the border, like my district in Arizona. On a routine basis, our fellow residents are exposed to this illicit activity that crosses the border, trespasses on their land, destroys their property, and puts their lives at risk. Small businesses and tourism suffer from the illegal activity that is pushed deep into the interior of the country by a strategy that I believe now needs to be re-examined. To be clear, I'm not asking agents to link arms across the border 2,000 miles south, shoulder to shoulder. What I am asking for is we focus our resources and manpower more at the line of scrimmage, not 5, 10, 100 miles inland. Our enforcement posture should be arranged with the intent of anticipating, deterring, and stopping most illicit activity before it enters our communities, using the overwhelming majority of agents and technology as close to the line as terrain access and agent safety will allow. I've spent countless hours at the border with ranchers, border residents, and the Border Patrol. In many instances, I've observed miles-long stretches of the border with little to no agent activity actually patrolling the road near the fence. I've also witnessed whole sections of fence cut out, allowing an untold number of vehicles to come across the border before being detected. Presence on the border matters, serving as both a deterrent to legal activity and as a rapid response to inevitable breaches. I'm mindful that geography has an effect on where we apprehend individuals and interdict narcotics, but we cannot cede 10 to 100 miles or more of U.S. territory waiting for these nefarious actors to be caught at the time and place of our choosing. Instead, we have to take the fight to them at the earliest point of the incursion. In Tucson, 48% of the total number of apprehensions took place more than 5 miles from the physical border. Compare that with Yuma or Rio Grande Valley in Texas, where more than 84% of illicit crossings are apprehended in the first 5 miles. But let's be clear, for citizens who live along the border, 5 miles is like an eternity. Interior checkpoints are part of the layered approach to border security that have created challenges for the men and women that I was sent here to represent. The Border Patrol uses a mix of permanent and tactical checkpoints along major routes in and out of the border. Consistent with its defense in depth strategy, checkpoints are designed to push the illicit traffic around the checkpoints into areas where the Border Patrol has a better chance of interdiction. But when checkpoints have really done is to introduce the inconvenience, hassle, and the threat as a way of life for law-abiding American citizens who live near these checkpoints. The Border Patrol has little to show for their use. Very few apprehensions take place at an interior checkpoint, and to add insult to injury, the checkpoints are closed when it rains to prevent a traffic accident. All the cartels have to do is wait for the weather to change to bypass this layer of defense. In 2014, the University of Arizona's National Center for Border Security and Immigration conducted an in-depth study concerning the effectiveness of checkpoints and the impact on local communities. The report makes a series of recommendations to develop measures of effectiveness and to closely track the impacts of checkpoints on communities. To date, I don't think the Border Patrol has followed or implemented the recommendations, but I look forward to talking about that today. And we do have a University of Arizona representative on the second panel. Defense in depth and the layered approach to border security sounds good in theory, but there are real-world negative impacts for the American citizens who live at or near the border. I look forward to hearing from the Chief and the witnesses on the second panel to discuss looking at a better approach. The Chair now recognizes the ranking member of the subcommittee, gentleman from Texas, Mr. Vela, for any statement he may have.
Thank you, Congresswoman McSally. I don't have a whole lot more to add. I want to welcome you, Chief Morgan, to this hearing today and congratulate you on your appointment. My perspective on your agency and these checkpoints comes from having crossed the Sarita and Falfurrias checkpoint virtually all of my life. When I was a young lawyer, I traveled between Brownsville and Corpus Christi almost weekly, and I used to get really frustrated having to go through the checkpoint because to me it didn't make sense that I, as an American citizen born in Brownsville, would have to be asked whether or not I was a citizen 2 hours north. However, my father was a federal judge with jurisdiction over the Sarita checkpoint, and when I would often voice my frustration, he would remind me of the volume of apprehensions that he would witness. So over time, I kind of softened my reaction. But your agency is very much a part of life across the entire U.S.-Mexico border, and definitely for those of us in South Texas. Over the course of the last year, I can tell you, I talk to your agents on an official basis sometimes, but more often on an unofficial basis because they live all around us. They're part of our social fabric. And I can tell you that you have some challenges ahead because over the course of the last year, there is hardly an agent that I have run into, many who have been part of the agency for many, many years, who have expressed a level of dissatisfaction and just feeling a lot of low morale with many of the people that work for the agency. So I look forward to working with you as we move forward and with the rest of the committee and to see what we can do about improving morale for the agents on the ground and doing what we can to make your agency as effective as possible. But I yield the balance of my time.
Thanks. The gentleman yields. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We're pleased to be joined today by two panels of distinguished witnesses to discuss the important topic today. The sole witness of our first panel is Mr. Mark Morgan. Mr. Morgan is the Chief of the United States Border Patrol, a position he assumed earlier this year. Before entering the U.S. Border Patrol, Mr. Morgan served in the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Los Angeles Police Department, and the U.S. Marines. While at the FBI, Chief Morgan served as the special agent in charge of El Paso Division and as a Deputy Assistant Director for the Inspection Division. Chief Morgan's full written statement will appear in the record. The Chair now recognizes the Chief for 5 minutes.
Good morning. Chairwoman McSally, Ranking Member Vela, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for holding this important hearing today. This is a proud moment for me. This is the first appearance at a congressional hearing representing the dedicated and talented men and women of the United States Border Patrol. During my first 2 months here as Chief, I've had the privilege to meet thousands of agents, staff, and trainees along the northern, southern, coastal borders, the United States Border Patrol Academy, and a headquarters here in Washington. I can't think of a better way for me to have started my tenure than to get out in the field, to listen, learn, and observe. It's exceeded my expectations. In all these interactions, two critical facts have been crystal clear to me. One, I still have a heck of a lot to learn. And two, the men and women of the United States Border Patrol have one of the toughest jobs in the federal law enforcement. The complex challenges we face in 21st century law enforcement are more difficult than I've seen in my 30 years of my career. The threat environment is constantly evolving, and this demands that we do the same. This was never more evident than my assignment as the FBI Special Agent in charge of the El Paso Division in Texas. The unique environment facing law enforcement and the intelligence community along the southwest border are unparalleled. It was there that I first learned about the vast and challenging Border Patrol mission and just how critical it is to our nation's security. I was astonished at the magnitude of the Border Patrol mission, and I was equally impressed with the men and women serving honorably every day to carry out that complex, constantly evolving, and never-ending mission. I can tell you from my personal experience, they are hardworking, dedicated to this mission and their country, and have and continue to make personal sacrifices to protect the citizens of this great nation. So I sit before you today, honored and privileged to be part of the United States Border Patrol team. You know, the numbers we often hear associated with the United States Border Patrol are the numbers of annual apprehensions of those attempting to illegally enter the country every year. It's hundreds of thousands. I'd like to take a few minutes to also share some other numbers that we don't often talk about. I've learned that the United States Border Patrol agents are among the most assaulted law enforcement personnel in the country. There have been 7,542 assaults against agents since 2006, and 30 agents have died in the line of duty since 2003. The recent passing of Border Patrol agent Manuel Alvarez serves as a vivid reminder of the dangerous, challenging, and unique environment Border Patrol agents are asked to experience. Another number which often gets little mention is how often the Border Patrol agents put themselves in harm's way to provide emergency medical care and assistance to those in need, to include those that are trying to illegally enter the United States. Every year, the United States Border Patrol is involved in the rescue of thousands of victims of human smuggling and individuals attempting to illegally cross the United States. More than 3,700 this fiscal year alone. In July, the Laredo Sector Border Patrol agent risked his own life as he jumped into the Rio Grande to save 4 victims that were surely to drown. Also this past July, the Tucson Sector Border Patrol agents risked their own lives to rescue 15 individuals that were attempting to illegally enter the United States, and they found themselves trapped in an open pit mine in Green Valley, Arizona. And just a few weeks ago, the Buffalo Sector Border Patrol Marine units made landfall on the Canadian shore in the middle of the night after observing a house was on fire. They made landfall and they alerted the residents' family and escorted them to safety as the home became engulfed in flames. Today's hearing is to discuss Border Patrol agents and the Border Patrol strategic use of checkpoints. I think that it does acknowledge that illegal and dangerous cross-border activity can occur away from the immediate border. The Border Patrol's posture includes a threat-based, intelligence-driven, multifaceted approach, such as checkpoints and forward and operating bases that are strategically located on known routes from the border in an effort to maximize our resources and prevent a single point of failure. For example, just a few weeks ago, a driver attempted to flee the Cerrito checkpoint in the Rio Grande Valley when Border Patrol agent K-9 had alerted to his vehicle. The driver was apprehended and 7 people, illegal immigrants, were discovered locked in the vehicle trunk with no means of escape. Along with sophisticated technology, enhanced infrastructure, the dedicated and skilled law enforcement personnel and partnerships, the use of checkpoint operations are a current component of the Border Patrol's later strategy to protect this country's national security and ensure the safety of the public we are here to serve. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to your questions and having dialogue concerning where, as an agency, we can get better at what we do.
Thanks, Chief Morgan. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. So, as a relatively new chief of the Border Patrol, and one that wasn't an agent first, you mentioned in your opening statement that you've taken time and toured the different sectors and just taking a fresh look as to the mission that they have, the challenges that they have. So based on that and the topic of this hearing, which checkpoints is one element of it, but really we're looking at the full defense in-depth strategy. Can you share what did you learn about the defense in-depth strategy, and do you agree that this should continue to be the approach that we take, especially in rural communities?
Yes, ma'am. So I think I first learned that I'm probably going to stop referring to it as depth and defense strategy. I think that there's been a perception that means we're actually intentionally ceding ground and territory. I don't think that's what I'm seeing. I think what I'm seeing, and after 2 months, you're right, I still have a lot to learn. I'm still taking a hard look at this, and I'm asking a lot of questions. I think what I'm observing is the strategy really is, as I said in my statement, is trying to come up with a comprehensive, multifaceted layer strategy that prevents us from having a single point of failure. That really is my concern. Now, there's lots of different ways that maybe that can be achieved, and we need to take a look at that and continue to grow. I think the Border Patrol is going in the right direction, being that threat-based, intelligence-driven, operationally focused organization that's supported with infrastructure, technology, and personnel. But also that I think part of that strategy, we know that regardless of as we continue to grow on that threat-based, intelligence-driven, operationally focused approach supported by infrastructure, technology, and people, things are still getting across. That's what I saw too, and that's what I'm learning. We're getting better. We're not where we need to be yet, but we are getting better. But things are getting across. And so as I'm looking at that, what do we do to prevent the things that do get crossed and do get by us? How do we have a strategy that gives us a second look at that, gives us a second chance at that to eliminate that single point of failure? I think that's what I'm seeing with respect to the strategy.
So thanks, Chief. During your time and your discussion and your visits, I mean, were you able to see, or do you agree that, again, if you see the vast majority in the Tucson sector anyway, of apprehensions are taking place north of 5 miles from the border, that the illicit activity does have some serious repercussions to border communities and residents?
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely agreed. I've been to Del Rio. I've been to RGV. I've sat with the ranchers. One night I had dinner with the local ranchers there. It was a great barbecue. I sat and I talked with them. And the elements that you mentioned in your opening comments are exactly what they're saying as well. And I think they're absolutely, unequivocally legitimate and everything that they say. If I was a rancher and I hear that they talk about the things that they do from what others may seem as small, a gate left open, it's not small to a rancher. Cattle can get out, right? They can have devastating impacts. They have seen people that have passed on their property. Their property is getting broken into. Things are being stolen. Yes, ma'am. So it's absolutely a serious issue. And I can say my tour and being out in the field, especially on the southwest border, I have not met a Border Patrol agent yet that doesn't understand that and take that equally as serious.
Great, thanks. As part of your assessment, do you think we have enough agents to secure the border? My understanding is we're now below 20,000 agents nationwide. And then I guess the other question, again, related to the strategy is, of the agents that you have, are you taking a look at where they are assigned? We hear a lot from the agents themselves about those that are being detailed away and not enough are mustering actually to be out patrolling on a daily basis. Those percentages, as we've done some, just different visits and talking to people, seem to be a little bit lopsided as far as those that are out in the field versus those that are in other assignments. So are you taking a look at that, and what have you learned from the number of agents and where they're actually assigned?
Yes, ma'am. And so I think all elements you just said, absolutely unequivocally, I'm taking a look at that across the board. There's a couple of things. So first, to answer your question, do we have enough? My first immediate answer is, I don't know yet when it comes to the personnel, because I think we have to do also what you said is take a look at the resource allocation and where are they at. I think also it's a layered approach. I think to answer that question honestly, it's a little premature, I think, for me to be able to do that and have that confidence before I give you those numbers. Because again, part of that is increasing our ability to identify and understand the threat and have the situation awareness, to be able to continue to grow, being intelligence-driven, and then focus on our operations towards that threat. It's also a combination of infrastructure and technology. Through the use of infrastructure and technology, it could impact the need for a number of agents. So I'm taking a look at that. I think you hit the other element right on the head, is that basically, are the agents where they need to be? I don't know. I don't know. I'm taking a look at that. I'm asking those questions. If you look at the history, as you mentioned as well, hold the line, gatekeeper. If you look at the history of the Border Patrol, resources had to be shifted as the threat shifted. I think that's hard for an organization that is static in nature, meaning people have to move and buy homes and et cetera, but also being agile and mobile enough to be constant, having that constant ability to be able to go where the evolving threat is. We're taking a look at that. We have mobile response teams, and so some sectors may see some agents leave. I don't know, you may see agents leave the Tucson sector, for example, but they may be going to RGV, which they're just getting hammered right now with the inflow and influx of folks crossing. And so we have to take a look at that, I think, in a holistic approach. But yeah, absolutely, we're taking a hard look at that.
Okay, thanks. One more quick question on the checkpoints, and then we'll get another round because I want to go deeper into it. So we've got these permanent checkpoints on most roads in Arizona, and I know across the rest of the border. I mean, look, if you are a hardened cartel operative and you drive through a known Border Patrol checkpoint, you should get the Darwin Award. Okay, so I mean, as I've talked to agents and I've talked to your predecessor, you're picking up the low-level criminals who maybe don't know any better, don't have good intel themselves, think somehow they're going to be getting through, but not the serious cartels. The understanding, the way it's been described, is you intend that the serious cartels, the transnational criminal organizations, are going to go around the checkpoints, and that pushes them into our communities. We'll hear from the second panel about some of the impacts of that, so we won't be able to have that sort of dialogue. So I want to make sure we get this discussion out in this first panel. So, and then we talk to agents who say they don't have enough manning to actually go out and patrol the walk-around. So this is impacting, if they're agents are at the checkpoints, but they're not out there fanning out for those that are going around it, then you're still not intercepting them, yet they're being a public safety threat to the communities that are around the checkpoint. So can you just talk a little bit about that checkpoint strategy, the fact that they're fixed versus roaming, they close down when the rain comes, so, the bad guys just line up during monsoon season, they know exactly when to go around them, and just like what your assessment is of how we can improve or take a fresh look at the use of these checkpoints.
Yes, ma'am. First of all, I want to say absolutely we should take a look at this at 100%, and I am, and we are absolutely looking for every opportunity we can improve. I think that's how great organizations get better. I think the Border Patrol is a great organization, but I think the way we get better is to continue to challenge ourselves and ask ourselves, is what we're doing working? Is it effective? And can we get better? So absolutely, I'll be asking those questions. Now, more specific, I'll have to do a little bit more work to be able to provide you a solid answer whether specific cartels are using the checkpoints. I can tell you from my experiences, 20 years in the FBI, and as well as what I've seen thus far in the Border Patrol, is that serious drug cartels do use lower-level mules to do transportation. I think last year alone, the checkpoints, I think it was around 75,000 tons of drugs seized this year. We're about on track to do that via the checkpoints. So they are getting serious amounts of drugs. Now they change their TTPs. Sometimes the loads are smaller, but that doesn't mean necessarily it's not coming from a serious drug trafficking organization. They're just changing their TTPs. The other part, with respect to pushing around the community, I think I'm seeing there's some truth to that. What I'm seeing that Border Patrol is part of the strategy is they do have roving patrols around those checkpoints on intelligence and the traffic flow. They also can set up intermediate or temporary checkpoints as well to try to stop the flow of people going around. So I think they do have a strategy that's trying to address that. Holistically, how effective is that? I still need to get some more data on that to be able to provide you a good answer.
Okay, I'll come back during round two, but I will tell you that at some checkpoints in Arizona, they don't have the manning to do the roving patrols. So these are all hand in hand. Where is the Border Patrol manning going, and do you have the manning to be able to address those issues? And then the impact again on the private property and the local communities when the bad guys are going around. So I'm going to go ahead and yield to my ranking member here, Mr. Vela, for his opening questions.
So are you making a distinction between the effectiveness of the checkpoints in terms of catching people versus catching loads of narcotics?
I'm not sure, sir, what you mean by making a difference.
Well, I guess what I'm curious about is, we see statistics when we cross these checkpoints in terms of, pounds of cocaine that have been, that has been detected, and so much marijuana. And I'm just trying to get an assessment as to what your sense of how effective the checkpoints are with respect to apprehension of narcotics versus apprehension of people.
I think at this point, I'm seeing the checkpoints that are an effective part right now of the strategy to prevent us from having a single point of failure. I am seeing that. I'm not saying that there's not alternatives that we should look at or we could look at, again, as part of the strategy to prevent us from having a single point of failure. But currently, as a structure right now, the statistics are showing that they are effective at the immigration enforcement of which their primary purpose is. Last year, the checkpoints across southwest border, I think, was about 8,000. This year, I think we're on track for that same number as well. So on its face, they appear to be effective as that part of the strategy to prevent us from having a single point of failure. Now, ancillary, in addition to that, yes, they're being, I would categorize it as very successful with respect to drug seizures. I think they're also being somewhat successful in catching people, criminals that have outstanding warrants, state, federal, local warrants for some pretty violent, heinous crimes, as well as those that have been convicted of violent crimes in the past. That's also happening at the checkpoints as well.
Yeah, and I didn't mean the question to be critical. I was just trying to get your assessment of the effectiveness of the checkpoints with respect to those different tasks that the agency has at the checkpoints.
Yes, sir. And so I think right now, I would say they appear to be effective, especially with the resources that are actually dedicated to the checkpoints. It's actually a very small amount of the Border Patrol resources that are dedicated to checkpoints overall. And I would say that the statistics that are being produced by those checkpoints, I would say at this point, knowing what I know now, I would categorize them as being successful.
So back on the issue of morale, just to give you an idea of how entrenched the Border Patrol has been in South Texas and in my life there, your agency served as pallbearers at my father's funeral. So when I talked to agents, it happened last weekend at a golf tournament, and I had, by coincidence, ran into two agents, came up to me, and they had the same story, and it was, how deeply things had changed from their perspective in the Border Patrol, and not for the good, right, from a morale standpoint. And what I found, and this is not just a statement on the Border Patrol or Department of Homeland Security, but with respect to federal agencies in general, and the disconnect between the offices up here in Washington, D.C. and what's going on the ground. And I guess I know you just started, and I know that these assessments that you have made are your initial assessments, but what can you tell us about where you're headed with respect to improving morale? And for that matter, these conclusions that I've come to aren't based on statistics that I've read in these notebooks that were handed or what staff has told me. These are real life conversations that I have with the people that work for you, right? And so I'm just kind of curious, are you getting the same sense I am, or is it different?
Yes, sir. Well, first, I would absolutely love to maybe do an offline and get more in depth of what you're actually hearing from the line agents, because I think as the Chief of the Border Patrol, that's exactly what I need to hear. If I'm going to take a look at issues and be able to really make the impact that I need, I go out there in my stump speech, part of what I tell them is part of one of my key roles as the chief is to be their relentless advocate. And I think part of being the relentless advocate is understanding what they're feeling each and every day. That's really one of the main reasons why on day 3 I decided that I was going to go out to the field and I'm going to visit every single sector, all 20 sectors, and I'm not going to stop until I complete it. And since I've been out there, I've stood in front of musters of 300, and I've talked to 2 mechanics in the garage, and I've listened to them. And so I am hearing issues about morale. Morale is not where it needs to be, but there's a lot of reasons for that, and it's very complicated. I can say, so the FEV survey, the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey that went out, is that it really kind of told us and identified that there are some morale issues and there's some challenges, but that's only one point of context. And so what the Border Patrol did is they actually commissioned an outside entity to come in and take a look at the basic information from the FEV survey, and they went out. They went out to 13 sectors, talked to over 900 personnel from the Border Patrol chief sector of the sector all the way down to the mechanic. And from that, they came up with these basic 8 core areas, and then we brought back additional people to do a deeper dive to really get to the core root of the issues. And then the plan is, for my plan, is to really do some targeted teams on those issues to really try to address those issues to improve morale. Those are specific things, but I think there's also some bigger things that we need to take a look at too. I think we've mentioned some of those as well. And that's the second thing that I tell them is part of my job that I think will impact morale, is as a chief to get them the resources, the training, the tools, and the technology to do their job effectively and safely. And I think this goes to the heart of the hearing, as a matter of fact, is our strategy right? Are the things that we're using correct? We need to take a look at that. We do, everything. Setting as a new chief, I can tell you, I'm not accepting anything that I see as it's the right thing. I'm not doing that. I am asking questions, and I am asking for explanations. Why are we doing this? Is this the right thing? Are there alternatives to prevent us from having a single point of failure? Or is checkpoints the only thing that we can do? I think that's important going forward.
Well, look, I look forward to working with you on that issue and many others. And what I can tell you is that I'm sure the surveys are real nice and everything, but between Mr. Hurd and Congresswoman McSally and Mr. Higgins, who represents the northern border, and those of us who interact with your agencies every day, not to mention the people that we have working for us back in our offices. I mean, I was at my office back in the district 2 weeks ago, and agents were coming in. So our offices have a significant degree of interaction with the people that work for your agency. And, use us as a tool, because I think that we can help bridge some of these gaps, given our interaction with your agency with your agents on the ground day to day. But thank you for being here.
Yes, sir. I would absolutely like to take advantage of that. Absolutely.
Great, thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Duncan from South Carolina for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thanks for this this hearing as well. Chief, thanks for being here. Congratulations. I enjoyed working with your predecessor, Chief Fisher, and when I was a little more engaged with Oversight and Management Efficiency Subcommittee. I've been on this committee for 6 years, and this topic never seems to go away. You've got quite a challenge ahead of you because of the bureaucracy that you work for. I'm glad you're asking the questions. I hope we can make those changes as you seek answers, and I look forward to working with you. I think you'll find a willing Congress, at least a willing committee to help you. It's not just the border states and their delegations that are interested. Immigration issues affect everyone. Drug issues affect everyone. National security issues affect everyone, even in South Carolina. So coming on the heels of 9/11, 15 years later, a lot of reflection over what happened, mistakes made and all that. I've done a lot of radio interviews, and I've told folks that I don't know that we're any safer today by combining all these agencies under DHS, and our border still unsecure. I say that in that we still have illegals and contraband and drugs and illicit activity happening that's coming across our border. That's no fault of yours, and that's no fault of your personnel. I applaud you and I support you, and I want to keep working with you. But the facts are the facts, that we have illegals coming into this country, and we have another element coming into this country illegally, walking across our border, and that's a DHS term of OTMs, other than Mexicans. These are personnel that aren't just the Hispanic origin folks that are coming to take the jobs in agriculture, horticulture, hospitality, you name it. These are people who we really don't know their intent because the apprehension rates of folks that have crossed our border are speculative. I say that in that Jay Johnson has said, well, we take the number that we catch and then we kind of extrapolate that and figure out how many we're not catching. And that's alarming when you really think about that. So, do you know the percentages of OTMs that are apprehended on the border? These are people from Africa, the Middle East, Asia. What's that percentage, based on your knowledge?
Sir, I don't know that exact percentage of OTMs.
Okay, that is no problem.
I can
America just needs to know that there are people crossing our border that aren't just from Latin descent in Mexico or Guatemala or whatnot, coming to take jobs, coming to bring their unaccompanied children here or whatnot, that there are folks that have traveled great distances, oftentimes using false or fake passports and a lot of money, traveling through the tri-border region of South America, transiting up through Latin America, and coming into this country. Some may have goals of providing for their family. I don't discount that. But I believe some may have nefarious goals. And on the heels of 9/11, I'm going to be very, very cognizant of that. So Congress in 2006 passed the Secure Fence Act. I wasn't here. I applauded it as a state legislator in South Carolina, but then Congress failed to appropriate the dollars to complete the job. I don't know how many miles have been completed now. I believe in more fencing. I believe it works because I believe there are areas, I know there are areas you can't fence. Nogales sector, the mountains are high. But what it does is it puts the bad element, I guess, into corridors that makes your personnel more effective. So I see it as a force multiplier. But we all know that a taller fence just means a higher ladder, or a higher fence means a taller ladder, and elements are going to cross over that fence. That's where electronic surveillance, that's where other force multipliers actually come in. I appreciate that. But if you go and look on, and you go to my Facebook page, Jeff Duncan put it up there last week, 2 weeks ago. There's a video in San Diego. San Diego News, which isn't the most conservative news source, but they were talking about the fact that people are coming into this country, they're apprehended by you guys and let go because they're claiming asylum. And it also says that this isn't a policy that is bottom up. This is from the very top guy sitting down here on 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue saying let them go. I will tell you, in South Carolina, we're not very happy about that. About folks that have crossed our border, broken our laws, violated American sovereignty. We are a sovereign nation, and they're let go. So, and I'll blame you for that. These are problems we've got to work on together. I'm acknowledging that. I'm offering help to work on it together as Congress. And we've been told in 6 years I've been here by folks that work within DHS that we have operational control of the border. I can't get a good definition of what that operational control means, Madam Chairman, but I would ask the Chief, in your opinion, what does operational control mean, and have we achieved operational control of our southern border? The northern border is for another topic, another day. The southern border is where I'm focused.
Yes, sir. So I'll start with the latter, operational control. 2 months in, I am taking a look. I'm not sure, again, I caveat that with 2 months in, I'm not sure operational control is the right way to look at this. And I am questioning that term to be able to provide everyone that should with that definition. I think I go back to the strategy of being threat-based, intelligence-driven, operationally focused, supported by infrastructure, technology, and personnel. What that is the framework. I think the goal is that we're striving to have confidence levels through our situational awareness. So I'm asking folks, what are your confidence levels from zone to zone within a station, within a sector, throughout the entire 6,000 plus land border miles and 2,000 coastal we're responsible for. I pulled a little bit out from my FBI experience as we went through in the aftermath of 9/11. We're trying to figure out and ask ourselves the same question. And so I want to be able to get to a sector chief, to him or her, and say, what are your confidence levels with respect to the situational awareness that you have in your sector? Tell me about that. Talk to me about that. How did you get that? Talk to me about your threats. Talk to me about the intelligence process. Talk to me about your partnerships. Talk to me about the use of infrastructure, technology, and personnel that you use to get to that. And we need to have a defined set of metrics and factors that we all go in, that goes into a sector chief being able to determine their confidence level. And then based on that, that's how we allocate those resources. I think that's the direction that we need to go. But I'm asking those questions. So again, I would say I'm not sure operational control. And one of the reasons why I'm not sure operational control is the right frame is because the TTPs change too quickly. Again, it was, as mentioned, ma'am, your opening comments about gatekeeper and hold the line. Those are great examples of how we did all this and the stuff shifted. So at one moment we could say we had operational control in the area, and the next minute it'll change. But if we have that process that I described, having situational awareness, I think that's going to position us better to be able to do what we need to do. I would like to talk a little bit and respond to what you mentioned about people are coming here and they are being allowed to then come into the United States. I think that's also something that we need to talk about and take a look at. Because when we talk about resources, specifically manpower, what I see that we're being asked to do, and please don't get me wrong, we're going to do whatever we're going to be asked to do. The political decisions or the policies of the United States government, that's not our role to get involved in. Whatever you decide, we're going to do. What we're being asked to do right now, I think you could phrase it a little bit as a humanitarian mission. For example, some of what you refer to, sir, is the unaccompanied children that are coming across. I stood in the Rio Grande Valley on one of the cut roads where a smuggler had told some children, once they made landfall, to go on the cut road until you came in contact with a United States Border Patrol agent. And I was there and I watched that. And I watched a little 6-year-old girl holding the hands of her 11-year-old brother. And they made the trek all the way from Honduras. Now, personally, I wanted to take that little girl home with me. I did, and that's something that will probably stick with me my entire life. But as a chief of the United States Border Patrol, which I think we have a national security interest in this country, we have a law enforcement threat in this country, I think when I look at that 6-year-old, she's not a national security threat or a law enforcement threat with respect to what I see my job as a chief of the Border Patrol. But I'm taking a lot of resources dedicated to what I would say is a humanitarian role, and I'm taking them off the line. And so I think there needs to be discussion, and I'm asking questions, what are some alternatives we could do instead of taking agents that have been trained, that have a national security mission, should be on the front line. I'm taking them off that front line a lot to process a 6-year-old and an 11-year-old as part of the humanitarian mission. So I think that's a challenge.
Yeah, let me just finish up by saying I appreciate your position on the children. That pulls at our heartstrings, and it is the right thing for America to do to try to figure out this. But the issue is exacerbated, Madam Chairman, by all the other things we've talked about. When you think 49% of all illegals in this country didn't come across that southern border or northern border, they came with a permission slip. America gave them permission to come to this country. We trusted them. And they have violated that trust by overstaying that visa and remaining in this country. That's low-hanging fruit for enforcement. That's a different division, I get that. But going back to the point, that exacerbates the problem of being able to deal with her. So visa overstays, border enforcement, dealing with the criminal element within this country, then dealing with the other illegals that happen to be in this country and what we do if they're gainfully employed and that sort of thing, and the children you're talking about, whether it's the unaccompanied children that are coming across or whether it's the children of people that have come here known as dreamers. But you have got to take it in priority, I think, because it all gets so convoluted as a total immigration reform package that we're not able to have an adult civil conversation about her, right? So you mentioned structure, technology, and personnel. I'm with you. But if they evade that fence, you pick them up with a ground sensor and a camera or a drone, you send the personnel to pick them up, and they're let go 2 hours later, we're wasting a heck of a lot of money with structure, technology, and personnel. Okay? We've got to stop letting them go. And with that, Madam Chairman, great committee hearing. I would love to bring him back when he's not just here for 2 months, when he's got a little bit a sense of the agency, and have an in-depth conversation about, and this may be for the next Congress, but we ought to have an operational control hearing to delve more into what that looks like. So thank you so much. I yield back.
Absolutely. And on that note, we had a hearing with the acting chief, where we were trying to address the issues of situational awareness and operational control. Part of the challenges that we've had is how do we measure effectiveness? And those numbers have shifted over the years. When we went from 2010 to measuring operational control to measuring number of apprehensions as some measure of whether you're being successful, which I've never understood. Let me just be clear. I mean, if number of apprehensions go up when you don't know what the denominator is, then is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? And so we addressed this issue in a hearing a couple of months ago. I know these are complicated issues, but I do want to follow up on the operational control discussion. From my perspective, again, it's formed and shaped by my experiences in the military. There are two major measurements that I would be looking for as a subcommittee chair here. The first is, what percentage of the southern border do you have situational awareness of real time, not change detection after the fact, but real time. So if something is coming up to the international boundary and is attempting to go over the border, we actually see it real time, whether that's with a person or with a camera or with an airborne asset, manned or unmanned, whatever it is. What percentage do we have situational awareness of? Now, you may not be able to get to it right away. That's the second issue. But what do we actually, if it moves, we see it. And again, these are complicated issues, but I'm coming from a simple fighter pilot point of view of what's your situational awareness. And then the second question being, of those that you see, what can you intercept? That's operational control. So you first is, if it moves, you see it. Second is, if you see it, you can get it, right? So then you have a sense of the denominator because like we saw it, but we didn't get it, so it got away. So that's part of the the success rate impact. And when we've pressed on this issue, and some of the challenges we have with our constituents, quite frankly, in this national dialogue is because the measurements have been sort of shifting and number of apprehensions is meaningless to most people, they don't have a sense of what level of confidence do we have? What percentage of the southern border, which we're focusing on, actually do we have situational awareness and operational control? And the answer we got out of the previous acting chief was a little bit over 50%, 56% I think was the number, of real-time situational awareness. If it moves, you see it. You know something's coming. Now that needs to improve, obviously. We've got to get ourselves in parallel to a place that you can see it, and then you can actually do something about it, right? To be able to intercept it with the right assets that you need with the appropriate vehicles, whether that's foot patrol, horse patrol vehicles, ATVs, helicopters, whatever it takes, to be able to actually intercept that. Ideally on the south side of our constituents' ranch is not on the north side or 100 miles inland. And I think that's some of the challenges that bring us to kind of where we are here today. Obviously, if we were able to see what moves and intercept what moves as close to the border as possible, from my perspective, spending time with the Border Patrol agents, spending time with the residents and ranchers, if we were able to do that, be able to do the mission closer to the border as possible, which will impact all the discussions we'll have on the second panel, but also it impacts the humanitarian element, quite frankly. You're not having to go deal with someone out in the desert 80 miles north who's on the verge of dehydration and death, right? Because you are intercepting them right at the border. So all the things that are being referenced, and then less would be needing to be picked up at the checkpoints, in theory, right? I mean, we've got a number of narcotics coming through the checkpoints, but if we were able to push the line of scrimmage to the border, then less would be actually making it around the border and into the communities and then going into the checkpoints. Does that make sense? So, I mean, the part of our discussion is what can we do and what resources do you need to have intelligence-driven operations like you've talked about, threat-based, nimble, on your feet. As soon as we are effective, they're going to shift their tactics. They're innovative, they're entrepreneurs, these cartels. So what can we do to make sure you have the resources, the policy, the manpower, which is a win-win for everybody. This is a win-win for the agency, the country, the agents, the ranchers, the residents, I mean, all the way around. One of my frustrations often is that I feel like sometimes people are pit against each other in this discussion. Like, what the border residents and ranchers are looking for is not what the agents or the agencies looking for. We're all in this together. I mean, we can find where our common interests are to protect our country and to keep our community safe, right? And give the tools to the agents that they need that do that, and then that impacts the communities and the residents all the way around. I mean, this is the fundamental conversation that we've been having, since I've been in Congress and the time that I was running, and now, now that I've been in this position and the subcommittee chair. So, based on all that and wanting to get in this place, which I think we have a common interest on trying to get to this place where we keep the community safer, we see more, we catch more, we give the tools to the agents that they need, and push that line of scrimmage closer to the border. The question is, what else do you need in order to do that? What else do you need from us to provide those resources? We're not just going to throw money at the problem, right? Is it more integrated fixed towers? Is it more manned and unmanned assets? Is it tactical drones? Is it, agent trade? Like, what is it that you need in order to push this to the border, so that if we were to do that, you would see less and less coming through checkpoints, less and less incursions in public safety issues, because we're going to push that line of scrimmage south to the international boundary. What else do you need?
So, ma'am, first of all, I agree with everything you just said. Specifically on the situational awareness, I completely agree. And that kind of goes exactly what I was saying about the confidence levels. I also want to challenge the leaders that when they tell me what their situational awareness is, tell me about what your confidence is with respect to that. Let's have those discussions. So I think you're spot on. And I think we do have absolutely the same goal. The goal is absolutely, let's try to interdict everything that we can right at the border.
Right.
Absolutely, that's the goal. It's a challenging and complex thing. But it's also an exciting thing as well, because it's about strengthening our counter-network ability. It's about reaching out to our partners, not just within the United States, but our international partners, Canada, Mexico, etc. It's not about just being positioned to interdict them when they hit the border. It's about bringing the fight to them before they get to the border. It's about identifying those TCOs. It's about dismantling those TCOs through a threat-based, intelligence-driven process before they get to the TCO. It's about setting up solid infrastructure, a whole of government approach, whether it's through corridor initiatives, whether it's through the joint task forces that are established, to make sure that we're working together, that we're gathering the intelligence, we're sharing the intelligence, and we're doing joint operations based on that intelligence to utilize our limited resources. So there's a whole apparatus about let's take the fight before they even get to the border. And then once they get to the border, as you laid it out, I agree. It's totally how you laid it out. And I even agree. You're right. We may be talking. Our goal would be is if we're that effective, we don't need additional stuff. Now, I would say, from my position, I think it could be unrealistic to say that no matter how good we are, that we're going to catch everything at the border. So I would always say part of the strategy should always be something in place that prevents us from having a single point of failure. I'm not saying checkpoints will always be that issue, but I think you understand what I mean. And so, yeah, so we have to continue to do that. The last part, what do I need? I need to continue that threat-based, intelligence-driven, operationally focused approach. I need to make sure that we have the resources to drive intelligence, to gather intelligence, to disseminate intelligence, to continue to drive those operations, to hopefully, as a counter-network approach, take the fight before they get to the border. So definitely looking at our intelligence resources. 132s, intelligence analysts. Do we need more? My gut says we do. With the rest of the resources, I don't think there would ever be a chief that sat before you said we wouldn't need more resources. I'm not going to be any different in that area, but I think I need some more time so that we do take care of the precious taxpayers' money to be able to really tell you what it is we need with respect to the infrastructure, the technology, and the manpower. And on the humanitarian side, absolutely. And the border, please don't get me wrong. The Border Patrol agents, when I walked up, they didn't even know I was there. They were treating these kids with dignity, respect, and compassion, like they were their own.
Right.
And we will do that, absolutely. But I'm just saying that there may be an alternative. Like, for example, when I was a police officer for Los Angeles Police Department, I'd be working in the streets of South Central LA. I'd catch a felon. I'd hand him off to a jailer to process. I'd go back out in the street. So I don't know, can maybe we do something similar so that when we get one of the unaccompanied children, that we turn them over to somebody else that can do the processing, and then we get the agents back out on the line faster. That's something I'm taking a look at, and I'd ask your support for that, because obviously that will take some funding and some push to do that. The technology, that's an element too. You mentioned like the integrated fixed towers, you know that well. That's going to be a great resource in some areas. It doesn't work in other areas. You go to the Buffalo sector with the hills, that technology is not going to work. So we need to constantly look at additional technology. And so I'd probably be looking for support when we come up for additional technology.
Okay, great, thanks. I do want to go back to the agents and how the agents are used. We've heard from a couple of different sources that in the Tucson sector, we keep hearing the number about 25% of the agents are not assigned to patrolling the border. They're assigned to doing other things, vehicle officers and just other things that are not, it goes back to what you were just talking about. We train them to do a job, and we got to make sure that we keep the vast majority of them out there doing that job, right? Because that's what they're responsible for. That's what's going to build their morale, by the way, and their esprit de corps. They're out there doing the job they were trained to do, and not all these additional duties and details to other things that's really not their core responsibilities. Is that 25% number across the board, or do you have better clarity on how many or what percent of the agents are actually not patrolling?
So, ma'am, I've not seen or provided the 25% number, so it's premature for me to weigh on that. What I would say is it really depends on who you're talking to and their perspective. For example, as we talk about that threat-based intelligence-driven process, I am pushing folks, leaders out in the field, to put more people into task forces, right, to leverage and that kind of whole government approach. We should be integrated into the JTTFs, into the best teams, into the DEA-led strike forces. We need to be in the JTF West and East and et cetera. So we do need to push resources out there. Another thing that could be seen is sometimes a sector, and I believe Tucson sector was impacted by this, when another sector like RGV is getting slammed with an increase, we'll mobilize the mobilization team, and they'll go to another sector to assist. So some people may have the perspective, they see that and they think they're being taken off the line, when really they're just being reallocated to a line somewhere else, that we have a higher priority threat going on that we have to do. But again, I am taking a look at that. I'm asking the questions, the specialty units, do we have the right allocation? How many people, do we have off the line, and what are they specifically doing? Absolutely asking those questions, and that's a fair question that should be asked.
And Chief, I know this is just a snapshot in time, but could you get back to us with, of the agents that you have, just, with basic percentages and numbers, how many are generally out there on the line, how many are part of other taskings and other things, just, percentages. And I get that from being in the military. You need people in the operations center and all that kind of stuff in order to push good information. But if we could get a good sense from you and an answer back of where we are on those percentage-wise, and then continue the conversation of where it needs to be adjusted to.
Yes, ma'am. I actually want those numbers for myself as well.
Great.
So.
Thanks. And one last question related to on the second panel, we'll hear from Dr. Golub from the University of Arizona about the 2014 study they did with a series of recommendations to enhance really data collection and determining the success of whether the checkpoints are working and whether they're manned correctly and what things can be done to improve that. Have any of those recommendations been implemented, and do you agree or disagree with those recommendations?
Yes, ma'am. So I do know in part, again, it's something I still need to do a little bit deeper dive, but it has improved dramatically. We are tracking the number of seizures. We're tracking the number of apprehensions. We're tracking the number of man hours that's spent at checkpoints, and et cetera. So there are numerous data points that are being collected so that we can try to get closer to coming up with a really solid way to measure the effectiveness of the checkpoints.
Okay, but those specific recommendations from the U of A study, I don't know if you're familiar with them off the top of your head, but can you follow up on whether those specific, I mean, they put a lot of effort, taxpayer money, into studying as a follow-up from the 2009 GAO study, I think it was 2009, about, hey, how can we improve our understanding of the effectiveness of the checkpoints? So can you follow up with us on those specific recommendations? Do you agree or disagree? And how many have been implemented, or how many are in the process of being implemented?
Yes, ma'am.
Great, thank you. All right, the chair now recognizes Mr. Duncan from South Carolina for a second round.
Thank you. I really don't have another question. I just wanted to tell the chief, I apologize that there's not more active participation today. We've got OGR with Hillary Clinton's emails, and there's just a lot going on the Hill. And I don't want you to leave here going, golly, there was only 2 members of Congress and answer all the chairwoman's questions and all that, and think there's not interest in this topic, because I can assure you that there is. Mr. Hurd came briefly. Barletta is very interested in visa overstays. Of course, all the way around with former chairwoman and others, even on the Democrat side, there is interest in this issue. And I think at some point in time, having another hearing, having you come back would be awesome. But I just didn't want you to leave here going, there's not any interest in Congress about what I'm doing. There absolutely is. It's just the way things go on the Hill sometimes. And just know that folks from my state, the Palmetto State, South Carolina, are very interested in this. We don't have a border. We have an international border, I guess you fly in. But anyway. Thank you so much. God bless you. Godspeed. Thank you to you and your men, women that are serving this country in that capacity. And I look forward to meeting with you again. I wouldn't mind setting up something, privately to just get to know you a little better, because we want to work going forward. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Bye.
Okay, thank you. Gentleman yields back. This wraps up this portion of our hearing. Thanks, Chief, for your testimony. There's potentially some questions that are going to come out of the second panel that we need to follow up with you on, and there may be other members of the committee that have questions for you, and so we'd ask when we submit those if we get those back in writing. And thanks for your testimony today, and you're dismissed, and the clerk will prepare the witnesses for the second panel. Thanks, Chief Morgan.